So how will all of this work? To tell us just how is Dr. Reece Clothier. He's the Deputy Director of the Aerospace Research Centre at RMIT University and an expert in the design and regulation of drones. He joins us live from Brisbane. Reece, thanks very much for your company tonight. So tell us, just how will this work? How high will the drones fly? How long will they stay up there for?
Oh, thank you for having me on the show. Now, look, what Facebook are proposing to do is use an unmanned aircraft, or using the common vernacular, a drone, to provide high bandwidth wireless internet to people on the ground. So the drone would act a bit much like a flying cell tower or a satellite, and you'd be able to connect to it exactly like you would today with your mobile phone or your laptop. So the aircraft would fly above commercial aircraft, and above most weather, so somewhere between about 40 and 60,000 feet, and it would rely on solar power for all of its energy, and it does that by having solar panels on its wings, and during the day it would charge. Not only power itself and provide power to the payload, the communications payload, but it would also charge some batteries on board, and it would then use that energy during the night, so it can continue to fly during the night as well.
When it's flying there, does it have to stop and then there's a certain range at which people could receive the internet, or can it move around and you know, your internet drops in and out? It sounds like typical. The internet drops in and out because the drone's not above you. How would that work? That
most definitely could drop out. Yeah, it does have a limited coverage, so you'd have to be under the aircraft to receive the signal, much like if you get too far away from a terrestrial cell tower, you would lose bars or lose ability to connect to the net. You'd need quite a number of these aircraft to provide a good service and good coverage around the globe. So yes, it is limited, and one of the advantages, I guess, of using an unmanned aircraft to provide this service is that you can actually move it to where the demand is needed. So if you imagine an emergency event like something like Cyclone Yasi, where a storm comes through and knocks out large pieces of the cellular network or infrastructure, you could actually fly one of these unmanned aircraft in there and almost provide instant network coverage to allow people to contact loved ones or connect to the net, and even emergency services personnel to communicate with one another.
Matt, if there's that dropout problem, which is the bugbear of anyone who uses the internet, is it just a different method for the same frustration?
Well, and it's essentially, it will have the same issues. So you will need a number of them to provide the quality and service that you get today with terrestrial services. I wouldn't see unmanned aircraft replacing the cell tower network that we have today, but rather you'd be using them in areas where it's not economical to put in terrestrial cell towers, or to lay down cable networks, or even to provide satellite-based communications due to the cost. So you'd be trying to provide this to areas that didn't actually have coverage already. So in theory, you could provide coverage to the ocean, to hilly areas, or even vast rural and remote areas.
It sounds like such a great idea. I'm wondering, why is it that big companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, these are huge commercial companies, why haven't governments thought about doing this, World Food Programme people? Is this all about altruism and giving the internet to people who can't have it, or is there a commercial side of this as well?
There is definitely a commercial side to this. Communications is big money, and as Facebook points out in its release there, that it's trying to get new users as well. So it's by increasing the people who have access to internet, it's increasing its user base. So there is definitely an economic or commercial need for it. But it's got a long way to go. So to answer the question why we sort of haven't done it already, or why governments aren't looking at it in the past, is that it's got a lot of technology and there's still a lot of challenges to go. So Facebook wishes to fly these aircraft for up to 4 years at a time. Now, the current record for flying one of these aircraft is 14 days, and that was by a system in 2010 called the Zephyr. So we've got a little way to get from 14 days to the 4 years that Facebook wants to achieve in terms of endurance. There's a few technical things that need to be worked through.
And then in terms of that duration of that time, by the time maybe the drone is up in the sky, the technology to receive, say, the internet could easily have moved on from there.
Most definitely could have, but you can easily bring an unmanned aircraft down. You can bring it down the next day to get service, or if something goes wrong with it, and fly another one up to replace it. Whereas if you try to do the same with a satellite, well, the technology is up there, and once it's outdated or something goes wrong with the satellite, it becomes a very expensive piece of flying space junk. So the unmanned aircraft offers some definite flexibility and advantages over existing means of providing this sort of wireless internet coverage.
Reece, with that flexibility, as you mentioned before, you could fly it over rural areas and over developing countries, etc. How much of the world at the moment still can't access the internet?
Well, going off what Facebook released, they estimate roughly 2/3 don't have access to high bandwidth or quality internet. So by providing services through unmanned aircraft and even satellite and other terrestrial-based systems, they can increase their market exposure, I guess, or customer base quite significantly.
The other issue here, of course, Reece, is airspace rules. You mentioned before that they'll fly above commercial aircraft. Airspace rules and jurisdiction around that is such a touchy issue now in the US particularly, and also becoming so in Australia. How do you think that will work? Obviously the legal side of this will be huge.
Yeah, look, there's a number of issues facing not only this particular application for unmanned aircraft, but also for all unmanned aircraft or drones in general, and regulations is one of them. Coming up with suitable regulations that allow unmanned aircraft to safely operate and deliver the very beneficial services that they can, but also pose no greater risk to people flying on board domestic aircraft or international jet aircraft and other airspace users, and also to the people on the ground. There's also issues of late in relation to privacy and making sure the technology isn't misused. So there are a number of issues there, and they're not just technical before we can see the likes of what Facebook's proposing come to reality.
Dr. Reece Clothier there in Brisbane. Thanks very much for giving us a glimpse into the future and what may well be above us.
Thank you for having me.